Hello, welcome to Human Tech, a podcast about the intersection between humans and technology. My name is Guthrie. I'm here with Susan. Hi.
Hello, Guthrie.
We are recording this on October 23rd, 2024.
Yeah.
We usually do not um, talk about the date because I would like to, it's maybe not evergreen, but it certainly
Yeah.
is not date specific. But today's episode is. We want to talk about we are here in the United States. We have the U.S. election right around the corner.
Yeah. National election
Uh,
and
I
vo-
am
and
in I am in half uh, of a swing state. You are in
a full
a
swing
full
state.
on swing state. So you got
I'm
yeah
in Wisconsin.
yep you get the full full ads and all that stuff. So today's episode is going to be about um, voting and UX, sort of
The user
some
experience of voting.
and we got a couple topics to talk about.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
Okay.
Now, before we start, I want to say we should actually talk about some news stuff because you always save it to the end. We should do it at the beginning.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
as mentioned, we are in the process of working on republishing some books.
Yeah.
We have four,
A lot.
four or
Many.
five that will be getting a sprucing.
Sprucing up.
And just yesterday, we realized we we discovered a problem in two of them that sort of affects
Not a
things.
problem, but just a great some
Area
improvement
for improvement.
in design, not in content.
That's correct. That's correct. Yep. So we I feel like I've been trying to get these books redone and republished for forever. It is a lot of work, but it's going to be great when it actually is done.
Yeah.
Um, and if anyone buys any of the new books,
Yeah.
um, on the inside cover, I don't need to talk about any of this. We'll talk about it when we publish it. I was just
Yeah.
gonna say we got version numbers and stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't
So we'll come back with that, but just know that we're working on that.
just know that we have spruced up versions of some of the books. They're kind of live now, but we haven't
Promoted.
we haven't pushed it. Um, they're available for sale, but we just want to wait. We want to wait until everything is just perfect before we
Yeah.
really uh
Start advertising.
well and swap over a couple places. Like I think
Yeah.
Amazon still has the first
Yeah.
round and doesn't have the spruced one, etc. Okay.
Oh, and while we're doing things at the beginning, can we tell
Yes.
people how to contact us if they want to contact us about anything? Because we always forget to do that till the end.
Yes, you can email info@theteamw.com. Is a
Thank you.
great place to choose to it.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Speaking of voting, you know what I did just 10 minutes before we started the podcast?
What'd you do?
Vote.
Well, that's great.
I went and did early voting. So I'm all voted.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I voted early. That's all right. Well, let's start there. Let's talk about the user journey and how it's changed in voting, the mental model of voting.
Well, has it changed?
Yeah. So
I mean, because people are voting early?
yeah. So we have
Can I
yeah.
go back and just tell a little history thing about voting
Um,
just for
yes, and you
fun?
should make sure that your microphone's close enough as well.
Okay, how's this?
That's a little better.
Okay. So, you know how everyone thinks you're supposed to vote with secret ballot, but initially in the US when voting started, it was not a secret ballot. And in fact, to vote, you would in many places, in many elections, there would be like, I don't know the exact colors, but like blue cards and green cards. And you wouldn't vote for it. You would just hand in the card, and the green card was, I don't know, the one candidate and the blue card was the other. And people used to walk to their voting place with their card in their pocket. Everyone could see, and everyone knew what you were voting because they could see the color of your card. And that's initially how people voted. This whole idea that ballots are supposed to be secret is actually a relatively new invention. I just thought
Well,
I'd mention that.
no, and that makes total sense. And I'll say two things just about voting. Voting. We are not experts in all the different ways people vote. If you are listening from a country not in the United States, we'll say a passing familiarity with the differences that in different
Yeah.
nations, the parliamentary system, the proportional voting that much of the world has. We are well aware that the United States does things weird.
Yeah.
We did it first. We did it weirdest, so it's fine. We were the we're the beta software, just still hanging out after all these years that everyone else gets to
And the
refine off of.
user experience is not good.
Yeah, yeah. The as I'm sure anyone who's listening to this is well aware of. I think people in the United States are maybe not aware of how closely followed American elections are in
Yeah.
other places because it is so consequential for the rest of the world. So it is obviously a big deal here, but also in other places they're watching closely. And so um, my understanding is that many places, they know about the Electoral College. It's very confusing. Um, so it, it's fine. Okay, so that's part one. I'm not gonna say we are an expert in all things voting.
Right.
I think that's a good anecdote. I have the other thing to note is let's talk about the user experience of voting.
Yeah.
It's an old institution, and we are bringing our modern frame of thinking to this old thing. So,
Yeah.
for example, the colored cards. At first, you're like, well, that's a silly system. The system we have now is much better. But how do you vote if you can't read? And how do you set up a voting system if the majority of your constituents actually are illiterate?
Yeah.
In many ways, color makes a lot more sense than having to walk
Except
into a
for the
ballot.
people who are colorblind. But yes.
You could put a giant star on it. You could
Yes, you
do like
can. You can
a
combine,
Sneetches
right,
situation.
pictographs and color.
Yeah, you could have a backup. But right, so things don't just sort of that there's a history to all of this, and it's like why, especially in the United States, like why is voting so bizarre, right? Well, it has to do with what it was like before. So I guess it's worth spending just to frame the conversation 30 seconds just to talk about voting, right?
Yeah.
At ancient antiquity, there were there was a thing called the republic, and the whole idea of a republic is that you don't vote for a particular person, you vote for someone who will vote on your behalf.
Yeah.
That is sort of that's the element of it. People in the United States may not realize, for example, that the whole point of the Electoral College is that you don't vote for your candidate. You
No.
actually vote for the elector, who then will
Is
go to Washington and pick the
and
president for you.
they are doing the vote actually.
Right. So before we had the modern process, the way the founders envisioned it is white men predominantly.
No, only. No,
Well,
predominantly.
no, no, no. The slaves were not allowed to vote. But if we're
Yeah.
being pedantic,
Yeah.
there were freed black men even at the founding. So it
Okay.
wasn't exclusively
All right,
racial,
fine.
but
Predominantly
certainly was
white men.
exclusionary in a lot of ways. And if we're being very pedantic, uh, just just to frame things right, we had the 3/5 rule, which meant
Yeah.
that actually slaves did have a vote. It was 3/5 of a normal vote, but the owner of the slave got to cast
Voted
the
for
ballot
them.
for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, I know.
So that's why,
Our history is just
well,
embarrassing.
yeah, it is,
And women haven't voted. Women didn't have the right to vote.
we'll get there. We gotta wait like 140 years until we get to
Okay.
that. Okay, so right, so that's sort of the system that was originally developed,
Yeah.
And now it had some advantages over the British system, in which a lot of the or the French system. So back in the sort of Napoleonic France days, a lot of voting, and many other places, there was an income requirement.
Yeah.
Voting was for those with prestige and power and money. So
Yeah.
you either had to own land, right? Sort of the
Right.
landed gentry
Right.
in England, in France for forever and ever and ever. There were a lot of income requirements. So you had to
Yeah.
have so many, francs in order, or own so much property in order to
Right.
sort of be able to vote. So it was very exclusionary in a lot of ways. And that just changed the idea. Most people walked around assuming that there was a government and it was some sort of voting, but they were not a part of it. The mental
Right.
model was not that anyone got to vote, and that of course slowly gets eroded. Um, you have, I mean, yeah, again, you have the 3/5. That's why all the presidents were from Virginia from the beginning. They were all from Virginia. I wonder why. Um, so okay, so the way it worked originally in the United States is you had the Electoral College. You voted for some upstanding gentleman in your area. The John Smith of whatever. I like John. I want him to advocate on my behalf. So
Yeah.
I vote for John. John becomes an elector, and the different states had different ways of appointing electors. Those electors all showed up and they voted on who should be president.
Yep.
And whoever came in first was the president, and whoever came in second was the vice president. So
Yep.
the idea that the president picked the vice president, that is
Yeah.
much
That
later.
happened
It's
later.
much later
Yeah.
in American history. So that was the original system, is that it was very separated from the user and
Yeah.
the outcome.
Yep.
If we're trying to coax some user experience into this, okay, and then tons of changes. We have that system falls away. The party system develops. We have the Civil War that changes things even more. Uh, uh, there's the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. We get the concept of one person, one vote.
Yeah.
This is a new concept that when I say it, it sounds like, yes, obviously. Uh, It is that is both controversial and new
Yeah.
in American jurisprudence, and may not even be true. That is currently in the sort of like Supreme Court jurisprudence, that is currently sort of the concept, but it may not be. So, for example, felons in many states are not
Right.
allowed to vote in
Right.
federal elections. There are all sorts of other exclusions. You can't be 18, you can't do this, can't do that. So, sorry, can't be under the age of 18. So over time, the pool of users who get to vote in the United States has increased. Right, we in the 1920s, women were added in all the states. Though before that, a couple states allowed women to vote. Um, Before that, uh, after that, we have lowering the voting age to 18. It used to be what, 21?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So um, there's good reasons, good and bad reasons for that. But yeah, if you're old enough to be in the army, you should be able to vote on the person sending you into the army. I think that's a pretty compelling argument. Um, but it still doesn't mean that everyone gets a vote. Like we said, felons get excluded. Um, there are at least on let's pick undocumented immigrants, right? Sort of illegal immigrants. In the United States, we have a system where there's the federal elections, and then there's state and local elections. And the state and local elections actually get to make up kind of their own rules about who gets to be on the ballot. How do you
Mm-hmm.
get? I can't just Susan, if you wanted to get on your ballot to run for local
I did.
senate.
I
Well,
ran for a local office.
yeah, you did, but
I
that but
I
that
did
was
get on
very,
the
very
ballot.
local. I was talking maybe
Yeah.
like the state senate, right?
Oh, okay.
You can't just get your name on the ballot. There's a process and
Well, there was a
signatures.
process for what I had to
Even,
do.
yeah, even in your small town, right? So
Yep.
there's rules about who gets to run and how they run,
Yep.
and then there's rules about how you vote, right? You have
Yep.
to vote in this particular way. Some jurisdictions allow non-citizens to vote in local elections.
Yeah.
This is, I think, in some places, I think some people that would be confusing to some people, but if you live in a place, uh, there's a good argument to say that you should have, one person, one vote, right? If you live in a place, you should be able to vote in that place. Some people would say, no, only U.S. citizens should be allowed to vote, et cetera, et cetera. So we actually have a lot of restrictions that
Yeah.
take us back from one person, one vote. It's
Yeah.
just that now the pool has gotten so big, we kind of round it up to everyone gets the vote,
Yep.
unless you're a felon or not a citizen or under the age of 18 or,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, so because we have this fractured system, it makes for a really interesting user experience, because to this day, elections are done on a local and state level, even for federal office.
Yeah.
So,
So it's
Susan,
not
now,
uniform.
right, right. And so, do you want to give? I'd like your opinion on the user experience of a centralized versus decentralized system. There are other systems that you could think are centralized versus decentralized. For example, most of the portals that we use these days are centralized systems. So if I want to go to my Kroger pharmacy, the 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 login for every Kroger pharmacy is like a centralized system, even if I'm just going to one pharmacy. If I go to, there's each Kroger is its own Kroger, or each Walgreens is its own Walgreens. But when you go to the system to order a prescription,
Yeah.
it's the same because they've centralized it.
Yeah.
Um, it didn't have to be that way, right? Like, why doesn't every Walgreens pharmacy have their own
Own website and
website
portal
or
app.
port
Yeah.
that's different, right?
Yeah.
Like it's one thing you might be like, local Walgreens.walgreens.com or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Where it shows you the hours. I'm not talking about that, but like the website's the same,
Right.
right? Why, McDonald's, right? It's the sort of the franchise model. When you go to McDonald's.com and you want to order in the app, my local McDonald's doesn't have to create an application, right?
Right.
They can just tie into the bigger system.
Right.
Um, I think government has always, in the United States, government user experience has always been a little different than the corporate model. For some reason, that doesn't make sense. I think a great example are libraries.
Yeah.
I think libraries used to be a little more separate. I think a lot of systems now have consolidated. Do you feel like
Yeah.
that's true?
Yes. Yep.
So, I'll ask you, does Wisconsin, where you live, have a unified state library portal?
Yes. It has a poor user experience. I use it when we're teaching workshops. I use it as an example of what not to do. I
So,
love my library. I'm glad there is a library, but the digital experience is horrible.
so for me,
Yeah,
we do not have a central
you
library
don't.
system.
Okay.
So we have the Delaware County library system that I go to,
Okay. Yeah, no, we
and
have totally
it's.
centralized.
I mean, maybe they're just slapping a skin on it, but um, for example, I couldn't look at what books were in Cincinnati,
Okay.
right? It's
Gotcha.
I can only look in
At your
our
local. Yeah.
local
I
system. Now,
yeah,
within that,
we
of course, there are a bunch of branches, and that's all in one
yeah.
situation.
No, we have it statewide.
So, do
But
you have
anyway,
pros and cons about having centralized
centralized versus
versus
decentralized.
decent, or you can call it
Well,
federated?
yeah, but the thing is for voting, it's not digital at all.
It is digital.
The user experience is not digital.
It's digital for us.
You vote online?
I vote on a screen.
You do? We vote with
Yes.
paper and pen.
Yeah. No. In Illinois too, we've been doing that for forever.
You vote on a screen even if you're doing early voting?
Yes, and in person voting. I
I
should say there's
I'm
okay.
amazed. I've
Most
never
most states have
wait a
switched.
minute. I have
Okay, hold on.
never voted on a screen.
I thought we were gonna do this whole thing about screen voting and the user
No, I
interface and
wanted to
oh
do
my
the
god.
user experience of voting, which has to do with the process and also has to do
The
with
the
the
paper and the
paper
pencil? No, no one's
ballots.
using that anymore. I didn't know Wisconsin hadn't switched.
What?
Oh, what a disaster. Okay. All right. So,
No, no, no. Everybody uses paper.
no. I haven't voted on a paper
No,
ballot
wait a
for a
minute. Wait a
decade.
minute. Actually, wait. I take that back. When I went, there was an election in the summer, primary. I voted on a screen in person.
Yeah,
I
okay.
just
So you're
realized
just
it.
yeah, you're wrong. So, he
But for me, though, early voting was with paper today.
all right. So let's talk about the different types of voting because it might be different in different states. So,
I thought that
we'll get to the mental model of that, but just to differentiate, the United
yeah,
States has the voting day, which traditionally used to just be one day when you can vote. Okay,
right?
but because there are people who maybe can't vote on that day, military members serving overseas is a perfect example,
Yeah,
right? Astronauts in space, they just can't be there in person. Um, over time, states have kind of had exceptions
yeah,
to that process, and there are two types. One is called it's all called early voting, quote unquote. But there are actually two types. The first is uh, mail-in voting. So
yeah,
you get a ballot, paper ballot, in the
right,
mail,
right.
and that's still paper almost everywhere,
Yep.
and you fill it out and you mail it back to the
Or
state.
bring it back. Yep.
In Western states, the United States, this practice has been almost exclusively adopted.
Yeah,
So California doesn't release their final vote totals until like 2 or 3 weeks after the election
yeah.
because
Because everyone was
they like everyone just
doing that.
votes by mail and it takes forever to count.
Yeah, yeah.
I think Washington does a lot of vote by mail. So
Montana,
Western
I
states
think
are doing
does.
that,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay, so that's mail-in voting. Every state has mail-in voting again, mostly for the troops, but some states have expanded it to be like, no, this is how basically everyone votes,
yeah,
and that is done by paper and pencil for the most part.
yeah,
Then we have what's called absentee voting,
yeah,
which used to be different than in-person voting.
yeah,
It has kind of morphed and changed. And now absentee is basically being used. It's sort of the same process as voting in person day of. It's just you're not doing it on the day. So, for example, where I'm at in Ohio, early voting starts a month before.
yeah,
Instead of each little precinct, instead of voting, in your local school, there's like one or two places in the county. So
yeah. That's
there's,
not what we do here.
yeah,
That's
well,
totally
okay.
different here.
Okay. So, but so if you want to vote early, um, you go to the early voting place.
Yeah,
Um, in Chicago, they also had early voting, and basically what they did was you went to your local precinct, but they closed some of them. They just were there weren't as many precincts available, but you went to your local precinct, and you would go into the booth and you'd vote the same way that you would
yeah.
vote day
It's not
of,
what we do here.
but they call that an absentee
Yeah,
ballot
that's
instead
not
of an
it's
early
not what we
vote
do
ballot.
here. So one of the things is everybody does it differently, and from a user experience point of view, it makes it very confusing. So
I moved
that's
states, and you have to learn a whole different
you have to
system. You have
learn the
to
whole different
register.
system. When you can vote, where you vote, where in Wisconsin, where I am, um, you an early vote. There really technically is no early voting. It's just absentee voting, which you can do by mail or you can do in person, but it's all paper. The screens are only for day of election. So yeah, that I think one of the UX problems is that it is so different everywhere, and you can get your information wrong. So, for instance, uh, I know in many states, if you're doing early voting, you can go anywhere that is an early voting station. But in Wisconsin, I think you have to, if you're going to do it in person, you have to show up at the place. See, I'm not even sure. That's how bad it is. So I think the user experience is confusing. I think, the user experience of the ballots is confusing.
We'll put a pin in that. We'll get back to that.
Okay. Um, and I think the information, the instructions about all of this are either non-existent or very confusing. So,
Okay, but now you haven't answered my question.
which is what?
Pros and cons of a centralized versus
Oh,
a federated system.
I don't know. I would tend to think centralized would be better, except that I don't believe they can do it right. So then centralized might be a bigger mess. Do you have opinions on this?
Well, let's make a list of pros and cons. So, pros, you want to start with centralized or decentralized? Federated.
Centralized.
Pros of a centralized system. You can pool resources
Yeah.
to not have to reinvent the wheel each time.
Yeah.
So theoretically, the McDonald's app is better than any app a local McDonald's could do because you have
Yeah.
the power of the corporate,
Yeah.
headquarters to
Yeah.
design an app. You have one unified system
Right.
that is
Consistency. You would have more
theoretically would be consistent,
consistency.
right? So
Yep.
if I vote in Illinois, it's going to look the same as if I vote in Wyoming, as if I
Yeah.
vote anywhere else, right?
Right.
You'd have a consistent user experience.
Yes.
You can share data. So, for example, um, I mean, healthcare does not do this, but let's just say that I have a Wells Fargo bank account, right?
Yeah.
I can log into the Wells Fargo app and find an ATM and go to the ATM and get money out of a Wells Fargo ATM in New York City or
Yeah.
in Florida or in
Yeah.
Texas or anywhere else. And it's the same because it's basically the same Wells
Yeah.
Fargo ATM at the branch. So you have you have freedom of movement. You have you don't have to reinvent the wheel each time, and you have maybe a more consistent and perhaps better user interface.
Right.
Let's talk about the cons.
Yeah.
And feel free to like chirp in. Okay, you don't
Okay.
have to. I mean, I asked you twice, and you didn't really have. You didn't have a whole lot. So,
You're giving me a hard time today.
well, it's a tough question. Um,
Be
cons.
nice to me. I voted and it used up all my mental resources.
That's uh, you did a very good job giving a presentation yesterday. You
That
you
was before I voted.
you crushed it. So, um, oh no, like
The
it's like
voting used up all
it
my
like it used up your
resources.
life essence to. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So cons of a centralized system. There are some things to be said for different populations are different. So, for example, where you live, there is a large Hmong population, people from Laos and Cambodia.
Yeah.
So there may be special signs, special processes, ballots that are in a different language.
Hmm.
That maybe on a national level they wouldn't have that option if it was
Right.
centralized, but because it is such a large population, they might do things differently or have at the polls people who speak the language that is in that area. That's important. There are um, security benefits.
Yeah.
So if you want to take down or
Yeah.
rig
That
the
would be the one I
American
would worry about the
electoral
most.
system,
Right.
good luck, because every single system is completely different.
That's true.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff that's done by
Yeah.
hand. The different databases don't line up. There are
Right.
a lot that, if you know a little bit about it, a lot of it's just old school. Like the local county guy just like uploads to the state system like like a CSV file
Yeah.
with like here's our numbers,
Right.
right? And then
Right.
they check it later and they certify it.
Right.
But like when they actually report it, it's just people up,
Yeah.
like it all works and it's all secure. I'm not saying it's like it's made up, but it is old school and it's not automated and it's all different. So if you were going to like try and hack it, in theory, it would be easier
Yeah.
to, you know, hack one central
Yep.
place or,
Right.
if there's a bug, right? So,
Rather than
uh,
thousands.
right, yeah. So healthcare.gov is a good example, right? The
Hmm.
healthcare marketplace, when it first rolled out, or the Pell Grants. Recently, the whole Pell Grant system,
Yeah.
which is
Fell
for
apart.
getting into college, applications for college, like it fell apart, the bugs overwhelmed the system, whatever, and
Hmm.
so then no one could do anything, right? So
Hmm.
here, every election, you hear of problems, systems are down, people can't vote, something wrong with the ballots. Happens every single year, but it's usually like one precinct, right? And they can
Right.
just go vote somewhere else, or they have him, keep the polls open to
Yeah.
fix it. And it doesn't take there. You can't take the whole system down because the whole
Right.
system is
There isn't a
cobbled
whole
together. So,
system.
so there is sort of like a strength in
Hmm.
diversity
Hmm.
there, not having a monoculture sort of
Yep.
situation. Okay, so that's a pro. We talked about local municipalities might know better, and also, um, we talked in the beginning about like the different mental models of what voting should be, and there is something to be said that there's not consensus on this. And part of, I mean, if you want to get a little philosophical, part of the whole American thing is that different states get to be different. Your experience living in New York or Hawaii is just different than living in Wyoming or Alabama. And there is um, something to the idea of local governance.
Yeah.
And, hey, this is the way we want to do things.
Yep.
Um, some states, like California, might say, we want to make voting really easy. So we're just going to um, institute a really simple mail in ballot system. When I was in Illinois, um, and we'll talk about this in a second, the pandemic changed voting in the United States for sure. But when I was in Illinois voting in 2020, um, we voted by mail. And there was a portal, you registered, it was very easy. You would get a notification, your application is approved. You're officially in the system. You will be mailed a mail in ballot, and then you get a notification. Hey, we have shipped your mail in ballot, and then you get a notification. Your mail in ballot has been delivered. You should have it today, right? And then you fill it out and you send it back, and then you get a notification your ballot has been received and you have officially voted. So like there was confidence, there was checks all along the way, and you had the ease and simplicity of voting from home and not having to leave your house or vote on election day.
Yep.
Other states like Wisconsin might say, actually, we want everyone to vote with pen and paper because we're, I don't know, worried about election security or something, or for whatever reason. So, I mean, there is a argument to be made that different states get to do things differently if they want to do things differently. They may have different priorities. So those are sort of the pros and cons of the centralized versus federated model
Yeah.
for the user experience. One thing that I think makes a problem is that it means we have a lot of different mental models
Yep.
for voting. A lot of different mental models. Do you want to talk about some of the mental models for the actual voting itself?
You mean like for the ballot? Or how, what do you
Sure.
mean?
You can take it in a direction,
One thing before I do that, can I mention
please.
the interesting research that's been done? I believe this was Teresa Neal that did this, where they went and they did like the voter journey. And first they
Yes.
asked the people
So
in
good.
California. It was people who worked for the California Elections Board. They interviewed a bunch of people and they mapped out what they thought the voter journey was. And then they went and talked to actual voters and mapped out what the actual voting journey was. And they actually did it for two kinds of voters, voters who had a permanent address and voters who didn't. and it was quite amazing how the steps that people go through to vote was totally different than what the California Election Board thought were the steps
Sure.
that people were going
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
well, one thing that I think is, I have this experience, and I've talked to other people that have this experience, so I haven't done research on this, it's just anecdotal. But any particular ballot for any particular election is really different than what you think it's gonna be. Like it's how many times do people show up to vote, thinking that, I'm gonna vote for president, and I'm gonna vote for congressperson, and I'm gonna vote for senator, and then there's, like, 6 other, uh offices that it's like, "What? Who are these? What is this? The office
Well,
of the what?"
let's talk about your
And
mental
then
model
there's
for voting
and then
because
there's
that's not my
referendums.
experience.
Then there's all these referendums that, it's like, what? So, I now go
There
on
you
the
go.
online, and
Yep.
you can look at your ballot. Here's what your ballot is going to be when you go vote.
Exactly.
And I routinely do that, and I'm always surprised at what's on the ballot, and then I have to go do some research if I don't know the answers of how I wanna vote.
And you
But
are an above average informed voter, as
right,
am I.
right, and
You're
but
highly
but
engaged.
even just the idea that you can go and look at the ballot, I think there's a lot of people that don't know about that. I think there's a lot of confusion about where you go to look at the ballot, like it's some weird site, and then whenever I go there, I'm like, "I hope this really is what the ballot." It's like I'm not trusting that I'm looking at the accurate ballot. I mean, there's just, I think there's just a lot of those questions, and so the experience means that when you go to vote, I think for many people, um, I'm someone I vote in 99.9% of all elections. So I vote a lot. And still, for me, I never know what to expect. So I think for someone who doesn't necessarily do all that voting, vote in all the small elections, the local elections, the primaries, um, I think it can be really confusing. The whole thing, Guthrie, we have primaries, and that whole thing is confusing. In some places, you can vote in the primary for either party, but in other places,
Right.
you can't. Um,
So, Illinois had an open primary, which meant that you can walk in and say, "I would like a Republican
I would
primary
like a
ballot,"
right, or I want a
and they give
Democratic.
you one. Here in Ohio, that is not the case.
Yeah,
You have to declare if you are a Democrat or a
and
Republican
it's
or an independent, and if you
and then you
and you
get a
can't
different
change for like 4
and
years or
then you get a
whatever.
different ballot,
Yes, so if you say that you are a registered Democrat, you are allowed to vote in the Democratic
and
primary,
and
and
in
Republican.
in Wisconsin, you get the same ballot no matter what you say, but you can only vote for Democrats or only vote for Republicans, but everybody's on the ballot, and you can decide on the spur of the moment, "I'm gonna
Right,
be a Republican."
Republican or a Democrat.
So it's
Whereas if you
so
say if you're a registered independent in Ohio, you don't
yeah,
get to vote for either.
yeah. So,
There's not much to do.
it's just so confusing, and I don't think it's well explained, and I don't have any idea where anyone in all of these states would go to try and understand it.
All right, so let me just briefly talk about the changes because the mental model, we started with the whole journey of voting. The mental model for voting has really changed since 2020.
Yeah,
Um, it, there was erosion before,
yeah.
um, and but for the longest time there was voting day, which was the first Tuesday in
Tuesday of
November,
the month. Yeah, of the month of November. Yep.
and that was just how it was. That's the day you voted. This was always had, some people wringing their hands because, for example, Sometimes you're sick.
Yeah,
Sometimes, like people had suggested, well, it should be a national holiday. Why do people have to go into work when you should be voting?
yeah,
This is compounded by in many cities, the traditionally the voting experience has been terrible.
yeah.
So
Waiting
there's
in
not
long
enough voting booths. Yeah, I mean,
lines.
we're talking people. We're for people who may not be in the United States. It is routine in many American cities to have to wait for hours to vote.
Hours in
You
line,
stand
standing
in line
outside
2 hours, 4 hours,
in the
6 hours
rain, in
plus.
the whatever.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that they do not have the capacity. So it was right, and that's and you may have kids, you may have a job. Like
Right.
it was not an easy thing to vote. People said, "Hey, we should make it easier. Hey, we should have put more money." That's a pro for centralization. We can have more money so that we can have more
Yep.
polling places, more stations, better throughput. Um,
But
we,
that's all what that's a big part of the reason why the whole early voting and absentee
Yeah.
voting has
So
become so
yeah. So
important.
there started to be that erosion where people were like, "Well, look, I live in Atlanta. Like, why would I go to my busy precinct and stand in line for 6 hours if I just vote early?"
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I like there's this thing that's called early voting. And again, it was put in for seniors, for people, again, military members who want to vote by mail. But there's not like in many places there wasn't necessarily a strict requirement. So it wasn't sort of like
Yeah. You didn't have to
you had to
prove.
prove that you
Yeah.
were whatever. And so people started voting earlier. And they're
Yep.
like, yeah, I'll just skip the line,
Right.
right? And I'll vote earlier. So that started. And then 2020 happened.
Right.
And um, both Republican and Democratic states had, we'll just say, incentives to make it easier to vote
Yeah.
because, and in the political climate at that time, Democrats did not want to go out in public. There were higher instances of Democrats being scared of COVID, and they didn't want to go out in public and vote. And so Democratic states made it much easier because they were concerned about the virus, to vote by mail, vote early. They expanded access, invested in all these systems, because like
Yeah.
we got to vote. Money was being dedicated. A lot of
Yep.
COVID relief funds were like
Yeah.
dedicated to voting,
Voting. Yep.
expanding it, all this stuff. So that was part one. But then in Republican states, who's the biggest voting bloc by far?
Republicans?
Well, yes, in Republicans, but no, in every single state, it is older people.
Oh,
They
okay.
vote 2, 3, 4, 10 to 1
Really?
proportionally more than younger people.
I didn't know that.
And young people are voting at all-time highs right now, and it's
Huh.
like 20% turnout, where it'll be 85% turnout amongst 65 plus. I mean, and that's true for young people. Just don't vote. They've never really voted. And again, young people in the United States are voting at all-time highs, but it's still a drop in the bucket.
Hmm.
So older voters often in the United States tend to be more conservative, more Republican. So, and older at that time, older people were also more concerned with COVID.
Hmm.
There were probably Republicans who were older and had were immunocompromised and like didn't want to vote in person. So if you're a Republican and you want to get your voters out, in a lot of Republican states, they made it much easier to
Hmm.
vote by mail, vote early, so you could avoid the crowds. And in Democratic states, worried about COVID, they made it easier to vote by mail. But
Hmm.
so all of a sudden, the the mental model was always you vote on election day,
Yep.
except for these weird circumstances,
Right.
and or if you lived in like a vote by mail state. And after 2020, that got completely the whole mental
Yeah.
model shifted. It just
Yeah.
exploded. Suddenly it was, yeah, we don't have voting day. We sort of have like voting month. And
Yeah.
you just vote early. It's easy. Why vote on voting day? Like just
Right.
and for some people like me, I like voting in person. It's more magical than just voting and putting in an envelope. I like going there, the energy. I'm an extrovert. There's, the polling place and the people. It's fun to vote in person.
You
Uh,
want it to be an event.
yeah, well, it's a good time. You don't get to vote all the time. It's special. Um, so I do want to vote in person. But I can still vote early,
Right.
and it's still in person, and it's a lot easier than voting on election day. and I want to bank my vote, and. So the mental model shifted, and this year in 2024, we are seeing record early voting
Yeah,
for
it's
Democrats and
true.
Republicans,
Yep.
all in all the states.
Yep.
So that mental model has
It has
totally
really
shifted,
shifted. Yeah.
totally shifted
That's
as to how you
yep.
vote, and it's probably a good thing, right? Because if you're talking about, so let's talk about the other thing on the Republican side. There's a lot of accusations of fraud, that the election was fake,
Yeah.
that the ballots, weren't being counted correctly,
Right.
and so a lot of red states put a put a lot of investment into the voting apparatus to, we'll just say, make sure that the results were
Accurate.
credible.
Yep.
But that also changed the mental model of voting too, because it how do you do that and also still have vote by mail at the same time? And so it sort of required on Republican states a mental model shift from only votes in person are valid, or only votes on election day are valid, and the early voting was all like fake and done by the Democrats. Well, how do you do that and also get all the all your old voters to bank their vote early, right?
Right.
Like, what if there's a thunderstorm and people don't show up, right? It is
Right.
risky. If
Right.
so Republicans have an incentive to fix, to do what they can to fix the systems and make those early so in both Democrat and Republican states, the mental model change is really big.
Yeah.
Now, I guess we should. Uh, we're not going to have enough time to do enough. There's one more. There's one more thing I want to talk about, because we
Yeah.
we haven't talked enough about the UX aspect of it.
Yeah.
Um, do you want to talk about the actual UX of the ballot?
Well, the UX of the ballots is horrendous. It still is horrendous. There were what election was it that was really bad? Uh, had all
Well,
those problems with the ballots. That was
there's
what?
all of them. It's only the elections that were close that we heard about, but I'm sure there were
Yeah.
problems all the time.
The ballots, if you look at the ballots, they're just poorly designed. It's not clear what you're supposed to do. It's not clear what you're supposed to fill out. Some of them are really bad and probably result in people thinking they cast their vote the way they wanted and they didn't. Um, and what's interesting, Guthrie, is after the whatever election that was, the one with Al Gore.
No,
What
so
year
in
was that?
2000, there were
2000.
famously a lot of that was all paper
Ballot
ballots,
problems.
but it wasn't like fill in a circle. You were like punching out
Punching holes.
punching holes in
Punching
paper,
things. Yeah.
and part of the problem was the hole punch designs. There was the hanging chads, which was famous, which was
Yes.
sometimes when you would punch the hole, like the paper wouldn't
Wouldn't come
really
out, and
come
then it
out, and so it
wouldn't
was
get
like, did
read
they
right.
like how much of a divot
Right. How
did you have
much does the
to
paper have to
paper have
be
to come
hanging on
out
or
in order
not
to be a
on to
vote?
mean yeah.
Okay, so that's one problem. The worst one was, so in Palm Beach County in 2000, famously they had this design, and you can go look it up. I encourage everyone to go look this up. It's the Palm Beach County with Pat Buchanan. So imagine this: it's like a zipper where there's um, two pieces of paper that are next to each other, and in the middle there's sort of a seam with
Yeah.
different holes that you can punch,
Right.
and they don't line up, right? So they're sort of asymmetrical.
Yeah.
So it's one on the left, and then you go halfway down, and it's
And then
one on
there's
the right,
another
and then
one.
you
Right.
go, and then below, and then on the other side it's halfway down, and it's one on the
Right.
left and one on the right one. Okay, so and then you punch out in the middle what you want. But if you take a look at this, up at the top it says Republican, and there's a place to punch the ballot for the Republican ticket. And then directly underneath it, it says Democratic, and there's a place to punch a ballot. And then underneath that, it says Al Gore, which was the Democratic candidate, and there's a place to punch that. If you only look on the left hand side, it looks like in order to vote for George Bush, you do the first hole. If you want to vote Democratic, you do the second hole. And if you want to vote for Al Gore, you do the third hole.
But
If you
that's
look
not
on the right, if that's only if you look on the left side. If you look on the right side, you realize that middle hole, that second hole, that's
it's
actually a
somebody
vote for
else.
Pat Buchanan in the
Right.
Reform Party. And
Right.
so um, you have to understand that if you that on the left hand side, if you skip a hole, right? So it's you only vote 1, 3,
Right.
5,
But
7,
who's
9.
that? Yeah, it's yeah,
So in this election that was decided by mere hundreds of votes, which elected George W. Bush instead of Al Gore, there were thousands. Pat Buchanan in this county got
an
thousands of
independent
more
who
ballots than
got
expected.
many more votes than
Many,
expected
many, yeah,
because
like 3x what was expected, and
people
it was
thought they
probably
were
because all these
voting.
people thought they were voting Democratic
Yeah,
and
I know.
instead voted for Pat Buchanan.
But here's the thing, Guthrie. With that 2000 or whatever that year was, had all
2000.
these problems and it got a lot of attention. And then there were UX people, oh, we're going to fix it. And it was this whole thing. And that by now, everyone, I don't know, maybe some people are, I apologize to the UX people still working on this, but I think it all just got forgotten. And all I can tell you is that I think the ballots have every ballot I see has some UX problem or other, whether screen or paper. And although that one screen ballot that was for the primary, that wasn't too bad, but it was also very
I
simple.
think a lot of them are okay. They're
I
still
think that
bad, but
I
they're
think the
better.
paper ones are worse. Probably, I don't know why, but I just think it's
Probably
very
about the
important.
scanning.
I don't know how many local government places that are putting together the ballots are having someone with a UX background look at the ballot.
Well, the last thing I'll say is
Okay.
this mental model of the actual voting. People don't understand it, and I think that's part of the confusion.
Yeah.
So when you go in and you use the electronic voting machine,
Yeah.
you're not voting.
You're not voting?
You're not voting. What you do is you use this digital display. This is because the mental model is I press, you know,
Yeah.
I'm voting for Dick
No,
Cheney and
you're
I
right. You're
press the
not
button.
voting. All you're
What you
doing
do,
is
yeah,
transfer. Yeah.
yeah. So you use this digital interface, right?
Yeah.
And you review it, and it's a touch screen, and
Yeah.
it's kind of okay. But like
Yeah.
the person, when I just voted, the person's like, "All right, you may have used this one before, but you go here, you know, whatever you do, don't press back or cancel, or nothing will be counted." And the other thing, and at the end, do the review, but make sure you scroll all the way down, or you won't actually see all, and it's like yeah, it's not bad, but you could kind of see where people mess up. And it's like, but whatever you do, don't press this one or like everything. And it's just like, okay. Anyways, when you get done, you review everything and you hit submit. And when you hit submit, it actually doesn't submit your vote. What it does is it's like a checkout receipt,
Yeah.
and it prints out a
Prints
piece
it
of
out.
paper.
Yeah.
And then you take that piece of paper. That
Right.
is actually your
That's
ballot.
your ballot.
And then you
Yeah.
take it to the place where your ballot is counted. And they
Yeah.
scan it in, and that actually is how you vote.
Right.
So
Right.
there's this layer of abstraction that has been
Yeah.
added, where instead of you filling out your ballot, you're
And
using a digital assistant who actually fills out
fills
the
out the
ballot
ballot
for
for
you.
you. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a strange mental model, and I think it confuses a lot of people, and I
Yeah.
think it gives people less credibility about the system.
Right. Less trust.
Yeah.
Well, Guthrie, we got to wrap it up.
We didn't get through anything. We barely got to
Well,
any of the
okay,
UX
but
stuff.
we have
Terrible.
another couple weeks before November 5th. We could do part 2.
We could do part 2. All right. Well, thanks for this. We're still getting our podcast sea legs back under us.
Yes.
So I'll blame it on that.
All right. And I encourage anyone in the U.S., if you haven't voted yet, go vote. Bad UX or not.
I agree. Vote for someone, even if you can't figure it out.
Try.
Try.
All right. Thanks, Guthrie.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you later.